We start the show with the breaking news that has been coming in. Israeli police are saying that at least 7 people have been injured in a car ramming and stabbing attack in Tel Aviv. The police say the assailant is believed to be a Palestinian from the occupied West Bank and that the man was shot dead by an armed passerby. The Hamas militant group says the attack is revenge for Israel's large-scale raid in the occupied West Bank. Hamas says the assailant was one of its members. And we can get more now from journalist Sophie von der Tann, who is in Tel Aviv. Sophie, what more can you tell us about this incident?
So, shortly past 1 p.m. local time, an attacker rammed his car on a busy street in northern Tel Aviv into bypassers. He then left the car and stabbed further bypassers. He was eventually shot by an armed pedestrian. And so far, we don't know exactly if he was affiliated with any group, but it seems to be unlikely.
OK, is there anything else we know about him, who he was?
So he, as far as we know, is a young Palestinian man from the southern region of the West Bank around Hebron. The militant groups Islamic Jihad and Hamas have put out statements praising this attack, calling it, as we just heard, a heroic act of resistance and a first revenge for what's going on in Jenin, where right now an Israeli military operation is underway. But they're not directly claiming it, and this is in fact not unusual that these attacks are carried out by attackers that are not directly affiliated with these groups.
OK. We are seeing another major escalation of violence in the region. What is the feeling where you are? Where do people see this going, or what do they fear might happen?
So the situation is very tense, and it has been tense over the past months. We've seen more and more attacks in Israel as well as in the occupied West Bank. And the pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu from his own coalition, from his far-right coalition partners, has been growing over the past months to carry out a more large-scale military operation in the occupied West Bank. What we've been seeing over the past more than 24 hours now is the largest military operation by the Israelis in Jenin since the Second Intifada, the Second People's Uprising in the early 2000s. And this leaves behind a scene of devastation, many dead, many wounded, and is in fact another breeding ground for radicalization in a place where the Palestinian Authority has long lost its control over.
Sophie, thanks so much for that update. That's journalist Sophie von der Tann in Tel Aviv. Now, Israel says that its military operation in the northern city of Jenin that Sophie was just mentioning there is still ongoing. Thousands of residents have had to flee 2 days of violence. At least 10 Palestinians have been killed in those raids and drone attacks in Jenin. The Israeli military says that it has been targeting a militant stronghold in the Jenin refugee camp. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the area had turned into a safe haven for terrorism.
Gunfire and smoke fill the morning air in Jenin. Streets virtually empty as Israel's army pressed on with its operation. Some civilians ventured outside to survey the damage and to find a way out.
I came here yesterday to save my sister, but then we got stuck inside her house. Bulldozers and military tanks came. We still can't leave.
The night before, thousands of Palestinian refugees in the Jenin camp were able to flee after the Israeli army warned of more violence. Their escape not without trauma.
It's difficult for me to describe it to you. I was standing in the kitchen when a bomb exploded. It felt like the world caught fire. as if the house exploded. Even now I can't stand because of the fear.
Tensions between the two sides have been escalating here for more than a year. The raids were launched in the camp to root out what Israel calls terrorist infrastructure.
In recent months, Jenin has become a safe haven for terrorists. From that safe haven, terrorists perpetrated savage attacks, murdering Israeli civilians, men, women, and children, as many children as they could find. As I speak, our troops are battling the terrorists with unyielding resolve and fortitude, while doing everything to avoid civilian casualties.
The Palestinian Authority of President Mahmoud Abbas has called the operation a war crime. The United Nations says it's alarmed at the scale of air and ground operations taking place in Jenin.
DW's Rebecca Ritters is in Jenin, and she gave us this update about the current situation in the city.
It is starting to come a little bit back to normal. The centre of the city, not the refugee camp. We're not able to go into the refugee camp as yet. But the city that yesterday was filled with, the streets were lined with men throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails. There were fires, there were protest fires in the street. All the shops were shuttered. Today we saw a couple of bread shops open. The city is still in a kind of a general strike. People are protesting and they're not opening their shops, also for safety concerns. But we are starting to see signs of life, as you can probably see behind me, cars and a bit more traffic, a bit more kind of signs of normal life here in the city. Although we can still hear the drones ahead, and the action, the operation inside the camp itself is still ongoing at this stage. But we have heard that it is winding down, though we don't think it's going to be the last raid on the Jenin refugee camp.
OK. Now, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has very clearly said that Jenin and the refugee camp there have become a safe haven for terrorists. It's being used as a base to carry out attacks on Israeli citizens. What proof is there to verify that claim?
Well, that is something that the Israeli defence establishment, security establishment and government have been claiming. We have seen multiple attacks against Israelis carried out by Palestinian gunmen, some explosive attacks as well, from militants from the camp, hailing from the Jenin refugee camp. So if that is evidence, perhaps that is what Benjamin Netanyahu is referring to. We were in the camp last week, in fact, talking to some of the militant gunmen in the camp, and they said that there were about 300 fighters in the camp. That sort of reckons with the numbers that we get from the Israeli military as well. And they said that they will fight till the death, that they are willing to die, that they're going to protect their camp, their city, and defend, what they would say, defending the people of the occupied Palestinian territories.
All right. DW's Rebecca Ritters, thank you so much for that.